Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. We are tenure-track faculty members in the sciences working at a primarily undergraduate university in California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss.
Welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Hi, I'm Ruth.
And I'm Claire. And today we're going to talk about group work. But first, Ruth, how was your week?
My week was lovely, actually.
Oh, nice.
We had a birthday for my youngest daughter. And
How nice.
yeah, it was lovely. And it's kind of funny because with all the pandemic stuff, you sort of feel like, oh no, it's going to be terrible because it won't have the usual. But it was super sweet. And I think, they're very easily entertained and excited about things, so they were beyond delighted with all the birthday celebrations, and
How
it was
nice.
super sweet. So that
How
was a
old
good
is she
one.
now?
She's 6, so
Cool.
that is, yeah. Again, that's that period of time where they're really easily entertained is probably only right now, but it's going to change as they get older. But it was just really sweet and kind of like, this sounds, I don't quite mean it this way, but sort of an enforced break because
Okay.
obviously we're going to take the time to celebrate her birthday properly, and it was kind of
Nice.
lovely. Yeah, it was just lovely.
That sounds great.
How about you?
Man. Good. We're starting the final projects in my class next week.
Oh, wow.
And so I know. Well, one
Dude,
thing
how
that
did we
works
get
really
here? Sorry, I'm like, oh my god. But anyway, sorry, go ahead.
well, this is relating to what I'm planning to say, which is it works really well for me to put things in the syllabus with dates attached to them.
Yeah.
So like way back when I wrote the syllabus, I put that we're starting the final projects next week, and then I was like, what are they doing for lab next week? And I was like, I really can't remember. I checked the syllabus. Oh, we're starting the final projects.
Wow.
I better write that up. So who knows when I would have gotten to it if I hadn't put it in the schedule. So
That's
anyway,
awesome.
that was really good.
I love it. Okay, so I'm doing the quote for today.
Yes. What quote do you have for us?
Well, I have a quote, and it's from Harry Potter, which I know
Ooh,
has now
good.
become a bit controversial, right? But I'm going with it. So Harry Potter, and it's kind of relevant to today because
Okay.
the girls were listening to book 4,
Mm-hmm.
and it
Goblet
was
of Fire.
when Rita Skeeter has sort of forcibly revealed Hagrid's identity as part giant,
Okay.
and he's hiding in the cabin, and Dumbledore started saying, hey, but people really care about you and like you. And he's like, but not everyone. So Dumbledore says, really, Hagrid, if you're holding out for universal popularity, I'm afraid you'll be in this cabin for a very long time. And I think it's super relevant to, well, first of all, group work, because it is not a universally popular thing. And then also just all of this teaching. And sometimes that's what I think I should be striving for, is universal popularity. And obviously that just hasn't happened yet anyway, so it's probably not going to happen.
We better not expect that to happen. Totally.
Right,
That's great. And
so-
Dumbledore always with the perfect things to say.
I know.
Love it. Great quote.
Yes. Cool. So tell me, tell me what is working well for you with group work.
Okay, so
And how do you do it? How do you use
yes,
group work? Yes,
totally.
sorry.
So I teach this one class mostly, which is quantitative analysis. So it's for upper division chemistry majors and other people who want to learn how to do quantitative analytical measurements. And I do a lot of group work in that class. So we have maybe a quarter to a third of the lectures. We just spend the whole time. They're in groups. They're working on practice problems. We do get back together as a whole class to go over the right answer and answer questions and stuff like that. But a quarter to a third of the lectures are really dedicated to group work practice problems. And that I really think is working great. It's really good for them to spend time practicing the problems, since that is such an important part of learning how to do them. I think it's really great for them to work together because they chat about the problems and think about different directions you might want to go and help each other get over whatever hurdles they have, so that works great. I really like them having active time in the class where they're talking and thinking and whatnot. And then the way it works is I provide full worked out answers of the worksheets after class, and I've already had them made, so I can usually just post them. I mean, I could just set Canvas to automatically have them go up right after class, but usually I just post them right after class so that they can check, go over it written out really succinctly and all that. So let's see. I guess I think it works well because it can be a good check for some of them. Maybe they think they understood how to do the problems, but when they're actually doing it, trying to actually work on the problems themselves, they realize they don't actually understand some aspect, or they need more practice, or maybe something comes to light and suddenly they understand it by the end because they've been working on this problem and they now get how to do it. So anyway,
Absolutely. And I think also sometimes for them, the actual action of explaining something to someone else
oh, good
is,
point.
yeah, like that's the magic. Even that might be the magic when they realize they don't understand it, but they,
Totally.
yeah.
Totally. I agree. Yeah, totally. Explaining things is huge. And that's something I often tell the students is teaching can be really helpful to learning. And so even if you feel like you already understand this, explaining it to your neighbor is going to help you understand it to a whole new level. So, yeah. And what I
Awesome.
do with groups is I have them stick with the same group for a while, and I've kind of changed it up. Sometimes I have them stick with the same group for the whole semester, and what I'm doing this semester is they stick with the same group for a month, and then we have new groups for a month, and so we have 3 groups over the course of the semester, approximately.
Oh, yeah, so many questions. One is, what do you do? So when you're going to switch groups, do you ever have people who say, please don't move me, I really like my group? Has that
Um,
happened?
I guess I haven't opened any doors for that kind of thing to come up. So I
I need to
also,
shut that door, but it's
yeah.
already,
So
already
so in my
opened it.
other class that has groups is instrumental analysis, and that's just like we are changing groups. These are the new groups.
Yeah.
Boom. And it's kind of similar what I'm doing this semester. The first time I'm changing groups in quantitative analysis, I just said we have new groups. Here they are. Off you go. So I never really gave them the option to tell me that.
Yeah. Yeah. And do
Yeah.
you, in previous years, would you have let the groups form, or do you just assign you three, you three, you three? How have
Um
you?
yeah. Originally, I just had them work with their neighbors, whoever was nearby them in the
Yeah.
classroom. And then I kind of leveled up in terms of assigning groups to these are your groups. But you could, I mean, they were kind of squished together pretty tightly in a room, so they were still
Can you
nearby other
imagine that? You
groups.
can't imagine that these days. It's like, whoa. But yeah.
Yeah. And now, yeah. So I used to just have them work with people around them, but I do kind of like assigning the group so that everybody is working with somebody and nobody has to find a group.
Yeah.
That stresses
Yeah.
me out to imagine somebody having to find a group to
Oh,
work with. So I just
totally.
like to assign the groups. I do intentionally break apart people that I know are friends and already work together. The idea being so that they are interacting with other people and other ideas and all that. And then they can all, if they do keep working together outside of class, great. They can all bring the information from the different groups together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, like I feel like I'm on sort of a really intense curve of learning how to handle group work because my whole approach has been I really, really actively want them to do work in groups, but I have not actively facilitated that. Like
I
I just
see.
let them kind of glob up into groups depending on who they were sitting beside. And
Mm-hmm.
the physics labs that we had, the classrooms were awesome. Like they were like they're 3 large tables where they're kind of naturally all facing each other and sort of working. They just it's a very organically sort of happens
So
situation.
just by sitting down, they're kind of in groups. Is that right?
Exactly,
I
yeah.
see.
And so they kind of are all looking at each other, and then they just like half the table would sort of glob into one group and half into the other group.
I
So
see.
this is the first semester where I've really had to sort of get in there and manage the whole thing, and it's
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
definitely it's a challenge, and it's good. It's There's a lot of good things about it, but so yeah, I think some of the things that are working well for me, I think it's the only way to do activity. Like I feel like it would be very pointless to have them all sitting in silence.
While you're doing problems or something.
Right. And so,
Yeah.
like, I think that's awesome. I think one thing that worked well for me this semester is the only live time that we're meeting is this activity section, which is like a tutorial. And I think, well, I don't know if I did a good job, but I tried to really set expectations in the beginning that I was giving credit for attendance for this session because it's really important. And then to get credit, you have to actively participate.
That's great. And
And
I
so
think expectations for group work laid out is very important to making the group work work. That's
Right. And I
great.
think it's something I could definitely need to ramp up. But I think in the beginning, because I had put this weight on it that like you won't get credit if you're just lurking and not participating with your group.
And
So that would
how are you assessing that? Is that just as you go between the breakout rooms, you
that's a really good point because I just was lying and I'm not really assessing it because I just give them attendance credit, but I implied that I would be, and it hasn't happened that someone has been gratuitously, and if somebody was, I think at one point somebody had gotten up to go somewhere, and so I just emailed them, "Hey, I noticed you're not there. Is everything okay?" And really, I'm saying, "Please come back to your camera because your group mates are waiting for you," and
uh-huh.
so that kind of thing. And
Interesting.
then one thing that I did, because this year is the first year I made these groups, and it was really stressful to do it. And I had done an introductory forum where people introduced themselves, so I had some vague ideas about people, and but generally just not knowing anything about them, and then trying to make groups. And I had been to a talk at the AAPT meeting, the American Association of Physics Teachers, where they had talked about group dynamics, and they had found that groups of one gender were better, like less stress inducing
Interesting.
for people. And so, and I think there's probably data maybe going the other way too. So I had just heard that, so I was like, okay, I'm going to try and keep it, especially when you're dealing with a lot of unknown
You don't have very
characters.
many other things to go by, so you went with that.
Yeah, so I think I mostly, especially for women, and then also try to make it that women were never a minority in a group. So never like one girl with two guys,
Okay.
if you know what I mean. So, and that actually worked okay. But then I have just moved them around. I think I've talked about this on here, but the class I'm teaching is introductory physics. It's the first physics class. And I find it a real challenge because there's very much two pools in the class. There's people who've had physics before, and this is kind of boring review, and then there's people who are like borderline traumatized by how difficult this is for them, and especially traumatized by the fact that other people seem to get it.
Sure.
They don't have that extra piece of information that those people have already just taken physics before. So there's a lot of, so I did end up with a lot of groups where one person was just suffering in silence and not really able to say that because the other people were just zipping through things. So I've tried to reconfigure the groups to have more matched abilities. Do you know what I mean? Abilities is the wrong word. Matched experience, so that they feel more comfortable talking about stuff. And so that, I don't know, and I have really mixed feelings. Okay, so I'm kind of getting into the working on stuff, but so working well, I think this semester has been a real learning experience for me because it was the first time I actively took the reins and
Uh-huh.
was like, these are the groups, this is what's happening.
I
I
see.
think trying to set the expectation in the beginning, even if it was a bit of a lie, that like I expect full participation from everybody. And then also I think then doing an adjustment, I think I would do that earlier in the future, like rework the group. So I like your idea of just it's the month is over, here we go, we're switching the groups.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
like that. So I think I might try and think about that next semester.
One thing that what you're saying makes me think of, so in my instrumental analysis class, I usually have 12 students, and I break them into 3 or 4 groups, and then we change groups a few times over the semester as we go into different categories of instruments. And I do try to, like in that case, I do know all the students in advance, so we kind of skip the first group of who the heck knows who should be with who. And so then I try to make it so they're not working with the same person twice. That's like one of my variables. And so I kind of just start randomly, and then I look and say, are there any problems that I see with these groups?
Yeah.
And, the problems could be all kinds of things. And then, yeah, what you're saying about sometimes it can be good to put 3 students who are kind of struggling together
Yeah.
because somebody can step up and start making it go well rather than them all stepping back in their separate groups. So I've found that can work surprisingly well. It's kind
Right.
of
And
the
at
opposite of
first to
what I
me
might
that would
think.
have, right, that's because at first it feels like you're just sort of like just giving up on these. You know what I mean? But I
Right.
think I just did it a couple of weeks ago, and I've noticed in one group in particular, suddenly people feel comfortable asking questions
Totally.
because they know the other people are not like, oh, it's 5, okay, and those
Uh-huh.
people aren't being jerks, but they're just kind of
Sure.
at a different stage. And
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? So I do you ever have though? So I was just like, yeah, it's really good for people to teach people, but do you ever have people who take that role too far and sort of make themselves the mama hen of the group and
Interesting.
teach the whole time, and you're kind of like, oh, okay, like I don't know how to.
Are you worried that they are teaching things wrong, or what's the problem with that?
I think it doesn't feel very collaborative, and
I
I
see.
wonder at times. I sort of like, in particular, would like them to just wait a minute and give the other people a chance
I see.
to,
Sure.
because
That's
there
part
is
of
a
the role.
reason I'm not lecturing these problems to
Right.
them,
That's a
because I
good point.
don't want, and then sometimes it has been wrong too, and it's this person is very much maybe putting themselves in the role of an expert, so
Sure.
it's not as challenging, or it's not as much like the collaborative sort of like, wait, is that five? I don't know, because so
Because this
that's
person. Yeah, I see. Well,
yeah,
hopefully with them being wrong sometimes,
that will
that
help,
will
yeah.
help everybody not just trust them that it's 5 all the time. Yeah, I guess I haven't really run into that, but I would kind of think they're not going to always be right. So
Right, and
there's that.
yeah. And I wonder too, I guess I also wonder if the other people find it patronizing. So I don't know.
I mean, one thing you could do if it felt right is talk to this person and say, ask them to give the other people a little more time to think before jumping in, and then
I
maybe
like
they
that.
would have thought of something different, and then there could be more discussion. It'd be more equal playing field at that point if everybody's had a chance to think about it
Yeah.
before the discussion starts.
Yeah, I've heard of other professors also doing random breakout rooms, which some students have said they love, but
Just like each day is a different group.
right, and I don't know. I think there might even be a functionality in Zoom. I don't know if there is that you can just make random rooms, but
Yeah,
I I have maybe some strong beliefs in the class that definitely would not mesh with other people's. So I don't know. I just don't. I'm too way too chicken to do the random
yeah. Well, I mean, I
thing.
see perks of both ways. The reason I like to have them have some time with their group is to establish a group dynamic and
Yeah.
start trusting each other and being more comfortable with each other and knowing that the person who's always speaking up isn't always right or whatever it might be. You know, so then I want them to have some time in their groups to be able to build that rapport before I change it up. So that's why I like to have some chunk of time. And then I like to change it up because, you know, some groups don't really gel really well and I don't want someone to be stuck with that group for the whole semester. So that's the balance I've come to
Well,
with
and
that.
I've noticed this semester. I actually, because I had some students like, "Are you going to switch the groups?" And it turned out we have had a huge number of transfer students this year, but we have a lot of students who are students at our university but have not actually come to our university yet because COVID. And so they're really like, I would like to meet more people. Like the
Sure.
only person I know in this class is the two other people in this one group, and I just would like to, and I hadn't considered that before, that like people, yeah, want to have a bit more because they don't interact with each other in the large lecture, you know.
Sure.
So yeah.
And that's a
Okay.
particular benefit of group work this semester, and I
Yeah.
guess with all virtual classes where you get that interaction that you otherwise aren't going to get.
Yeah. It's so interesting though, because like I have two groups that are literally like might be best friends for the rest of their lives. Like it
Oh,
just, I don't know
nice.
what, but what's the magic? Like, why did that happen? I have no idea, but it's working for them. But
Well, that's great.
yeah. So tell me, what are the things you are working on? Sorry, I've kind of deconstructed everything because I'm like
No,
just
that's good.
interrupting with things. But
Okay,
yeah.
so I've been doing group work, slowly adjusting it and improving it in this class for a long time. And then just last week, I made kind of a bigger change and was like, whoa, there's a lot of potential here for this. So I want to tell you about
Oh.
that. And this, so the change was normally I would just, they'd go off in groups, they'd work on problems, we'd come back to the main room, or, if I'm actually in the classroom, I call them all together, and we go over a couple problems, answer questions, stuff like that. What I didn't do was have the groups report out what they were getting for the different answers
Oh.
and use that as part of the discussion. And this is kind of a key tenet. I went to this active learning and analytical chemistry workshop a couple summers ago. This was a very key tenet of having the groups report out, and I had just been skipping that part. and thought about it, decided I didn't want to, but then last week was like, let me actually try it, and it was pretty cool. So I want to do
Ooh.
it now. So what happened was, I said, okay, guys, we're going to do this a little bit differently, where we're going to come back to the main group, and you guys are going to report out, so, remember which group number you're in. As I went around to the different groups, I felt like there was more discussion than normal. This is totally
Well,
anecdotal,
because they
one day,
knew, right,
but
that
they
they were going to
knew.
have this kind of, yeah.
Exactly. So instead of working individually, I mean, they're always supposed to be working together, and a lot of them do, but I think
But
that
me
extra
too, a lot of
motivation
them.
encouraged more working together.
I like that.
Also, then we came back to the big group room, and I just said, Group 1, how did you start this problem we've been working on? And there was a cool thought. It was the wrong equation, but it made sense in some ways. And then I was like, okay, Group 2, what'd you guys do? And they were like, well, we didn't think you could use that equation because of this problem, so we did this other thing first. And so it's like, okay, forget that equation. You're
Interesting.
right. That's not the appropriate equation. Now we're going to do this. And that kept going. Group 2 was pretty close, but they'd forgotten a 2 somewhere, and the group 3 spotted the 2, and eventually we got to the right answer. And it was pretty cool because we went through all these thought processes. We got to the right answer through the contributions. Everybody was contributing. It was really a discussion. So it's pretty cool. But something I'm working on with it is, how do you have clear notes and a nice clear answer when we've kind of jumped all these different directions from the groups reporting out?
But actually, that was something I was going to comment on about what was working well for you. And I really like that you provide them with the solutions right afterwards, because
Yes.
then it kind of takes away that. Because that's one thing I have had as feedback to any kind of active learning is like, okay, this is all great and everything, but how will I need to have these notes for later,
Sure.
and so, but that's kind of cool that you are providing
Yeah. So I'll keep
the,
providing the notes for sure. As soon as we're done with that class, they can have, my systematic answers. And also I was trying to figure out, there's probably some way I can work it with boards where it's like, and I'm sure other people have done this, where somehow in the end of this whole discussion where we were trying all these different equations and slowly refining it to the right answer, if I do it right on the board, we can end up with the correct answer worked out on the board,
nice.
It just takes a little
Dude,
bit
I
of
wish I
thinking.
could, like, people could see me because I'm now staring off into space trying to think about how I will do this in my class next week because that's really cool. And it's something like I found with my research group that if there is an expectation that you're going to tell me a thing, people kind of get a little bit more active,
Yeah, it was
in
really
it.
awesome. And then there were more questions like, well, so we were thinking about how you shouldn't just ignore the concentration of hydroxide because of the dissociation of water, which normally you can ignore that, but they thought maybe you couldn't, so we started looking at that. So then we went down that path and resolved that you could ignore it. So anyway, all that just came up because we were having more of an open discussion as a class. And that might have, I'm sure that would have come up as I'm dashing around the groups, but I don't get to have as much time with each
That is
group.
cool.
And this way it all built together. So it was really, there was a lot of, I thought it was really cool. I'm converted. I'm going to do it again next week and refine it.
That is super cool. I'm kind of like, I'm thinking and thinking, and I'm wondering, I'm not totally sure. I wonder, can I do it this semester? But I definitely wonder, could I, next semester, I'm going to be able to meet with the students a little bit more often in the week. So it won't be just this once a week thing, but
Yeah,
that's super cool.
it does take more time, just you know, I thought I was already doing active learning and I was, but this is a step more active and
Hmm.
therefore it takes a little more time, at least in my one day of experience of doing it this way. But as we know, more time, but more stuff actually getting in people's minds and making sense, then, it might actually be a higher rate of understanding per time than we normally get. So,
Whoa, that's intense. Okay, that kind of actually is leading me a little bit to what I'm
okay, yeah, what are
working
you working
on.
on?
Well, one thing I'm working on is well, I have four things written down that I'm working on, but
Okay.
one of them is structure, and I've seen a lot of work in like active learning stuff in physics education research about structure in groups, and you should have roles assigned to each person,
Yes.
and then you should rotate the roles.
Mm-hmm.
And I have done that in not a very diligent, committed way, but I have done it, say, when we would do problems on big whiteboards back
Okay.
in person, and it was the person who was writing would rotate. yeah, on
Totally.
each problem, or that was like a small way of doing it. But there's much more structured things about like this person is the critic, this person is the writer, and like these roles, and then they switch all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me has always been a thing that just felt like too much time. And I'm lazy apparently, but and also like yeah, so I don't know, and I've just again let that happen organically. But then like when I said, say if I had this student who was always taking the role
Right.
of, you know, teaching and writing and show like that, that would be kind of good to alternate that. And then I wondered with you, when you do this, do you assign who the caller outer is, or that's not the
No, and
reporting out
that
person?
I've been thinking about that, and that's something I've been thinking about adding in, um,
Hmm.
but have not done yet. That's another part that I've been
Well, you just only
skipping.
did it last week. So that's yeah.
Yeah, but I know, and you can assign who the caller out is, or at least you can have them decide in advance, and then you can rotate if you keep the same groups. Then
Hmm.
you can just say pick, but then next week it's going to be someone else or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that'd be cool.
Interesting. Yeah, I think, and so another thing then that I'm saying that I'm working on is sort of a commitment to just that. You know what I mean? Like building that structure, and then say the thing, I'm really blown away by this whole reporting out afterwards thing. And that would be such a cool thing. But again, it's like a little bit of activation energy to make it happen, right? And like committing to that process, or committing to, okay, we're going to do this roles thing and then we're going to switch. And
Hmm.
sometimes, yeah, I can
You
imagine
could
that being,
you could put it in your syllabus like I did for when final projects start,
yeah,
and then
then
it
you're
would happen.
committed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it. Just like when we said we're going up for tenure live on air.
Right.
Yeah,
Then it
that was
happened.
like
Look at
we
that. We submitted our
hemmed
files.
ourselves in. Okay, and then the other thing is dynamics. Group dynamics is something I'm working on.
Totally. So what are you
And
thinking about?
well, just it's hard. Like it's really difficult to manage and kind of regulating it. So maybe taking that kind of active role. I think partly at the moment not being able to just have a sea of people and get a vibe
Right.
of what's going on, and
Sure.
instead you're only getting this snapshot in the breakout rooms. And in one class I only have, there's only 12 kids in this one section, so that I have a really good sense of how those groups are doing because I'm constantly rotating in. But in the other class it's 24 in that lab section,
Yeah.
and I feel like I get such a small snapshot.
Totally.
So kind of, yeah, regulating that, or even just knowing when I should regulate. And yeah, I don't know. So that I think is something I'm working on. And what like to me sometimes looks like an unhealthy dynamic, do they think it is? Like do I need to get involved, or I don't know. So
I think the roles that you're considering assigning
mm-hmm.
would help because then, somebody who is dominating the conversation, somebody's role is to check them or somebody's role is to moderate and, whatever roles you could come up with. Or somebody's role is to report out and it's not that person. So they're going to have to make sure that the person who can report out has all the information and we're not just zooming along or, I think
But
the
it's
roles
hard.
could
Like
help.
I'm so conflict adverse.
Mm-hmm.
Averse, is that the word? Adverse or averse? Um, that like sometimes it's hard. So say if I come into a room and you're just lurking and not saying anything,
Yeah,
and sometimes I want to be like, "Hey, and what did you think it was, Claire?" And then like
totally.
Ralph comes sweeping in. It's like Claire thinks it's 5, and be like, "Hey, Ralph, be quiet," because I want to ask Claire. But like, how do you? That is like I need to get a smoother script almost for how
Uh-huh.
to really like please be quiet, you're talking nonstop and I want to ask this
Sure.
person, or putting that person on the spot when maybe they have just been tuned out looking at the wall and then they're like, oh, you know. So yeah,
I
that
know.
stuff.
I've been saying like, and what about you, Ruth? Do you have questions or how is it going for you or something like that and make sure that I at least hear a word from that person. But I agree
Yeah,
with you like all they have to say is I agree. And then you're
I
like,
know.
okay, great.
It's fine, you're like,
But you
okay,
can't
thanks.
I mean, in a physical classroom you could glance at their paper and make sure that they have stuff written down that
Right.
corresponds or you could give them just one paper as a group and they all have to as a group come to consensus on this paper or whiteboard or something. So, yeah, there's
Yeah,
lots of things to be done, but it is tough when you can't see them on a virtual setting.
totally. Because so this week I actually did my thing with the midterm where they redo it in groups.
Way cool.
And that used to work, it worked so well for me before. And it was like they had one piece of paper and they all had to kind of work on it together. And this time it was so awkward because they were each doing it individually in their homes and uploading it. But I
Mm.
was trying to be like, it needs to all be identical. Like this has to be collaborative, and it kind of mostly worked for the most part. But there was one group where one person handed in like just nothing related to anything that anyone else in the group had done. And every time I went in there, they were like, "Oh, it's fine. Everything's fine." And you're
Mm-hmm.
like, "Is it though?" Because it obviously wasn't. But yeah, it's so much
That's
easier in
interesting.
person.
I wonder if there's some way of doing a shared document that they could all be adding
I
to.
know, that's a good
That'd be cool.
idea. Oh, that's a good idea. Claire, you're so smart. I
Well,
love
when we're
it.
asking the right questions, we're like, how do we
Yeah, I
solve this
love it.
problem?
Okay, cool. You know what? And just to have a little look behind the curtain, Claire has been suggesting we do a group work episode for like, I don't know, a year, and I've been like, no, I don't want to do it because but I'm really glad we did.
Yeah,
I learned a lot.
I want to do another one already, so it'll be back
Yeah,
on
no,
the
no,
list.
yeah, I do. I'm like, just give me another few months. But okay, cool. Thanks so much, Claire. That was awesome.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people you know if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.